title, Airlines and Taxation Across Africa. Now, surely airlines are fairly simple to tax, and the taxation of the airline industry across Africa is fairly straightforward.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But I'd say in practice, it's far from it. And in fact, not only is it not simple, applying the normal rules, but countries then go out of their way to apply additional taxes on everything they can. And it really is a bit of the slogan, if it moves, tax it. And those taxes can apply to the airline itself, to its suppliers, to its passengers, to the shippers of its cargo, to suppliers, and all sorts of things. But the common feature generally is the airline will be held responsible for paying it.
And is there a link between high tax facing the airline industry and high fares? So, who is ultimately suffering the tax?
Yeah, I don't think it's the only cause of high fares. Lack of market and lack of competition are also in there, but clearly high taxes must have an impact because who is going to pay? The airline is there as running a business, so either a shareholder is going to pay or the customer is going to pay, and guess which one they're going to think is more appropriate.
So, and Russell, what about foreign airlines? How can foreign airlines be taxed in a country in which they're not resident but in which they're operating?
Well, I think there's two broad schools. One is to say they won't be taxed because there's a protection. Another, my home country airline, when they fly to other countries, won't get taxed either, and that's all very nice and good. And the tax will be paid in the country where the airline comes from. That's perhaps the best position, and the one people might like to aim for, but it's not very common, especially in Africa. The more likely one is they're going to say, well, you should pay tax, and perhaps we'll try and work it out as on a percentage of your assumed profits, applying your overall profit margin in the business. That's not always very attractive, especially if there isn't a profit margin. Oh, the second is to say, well, you picked up so much customers and freight in our country, and we're taxing you an amount on the revenue from that, which is a lot more robust and simple, but not always very fair.
And then talk us through double taxation agreements. Do double taxation agreements help in that situation to ensure a fair split of the profit between the country where the airline is resident, and the country where they're operating?
The DTAs can lead to a better result. There's a number of problems. One, is there a DTA? There's not that many. There's a recent one in the ECOWAS member states in West Africa, which helps. Certain airlines, it'll help, and that may be useful. But awful lot of countries don't have DTAs, and there generally doesn't seem to be a tax provision in the BASAs, the bilateral air service agreements. That's the one. Secondly, when you do get hold of it, it may still have a liftings tax. That is a percentage of the cargo and passenger revenue for the goods and people you pick up in that country. And it can still have it. It may not be a very nice percentage. Thirdly, there may be a thing called reciprocity. And this requires you to have knowledge not only of your own business, but your competitors. So say I'm flying into a country and it says, the DTA says, well, you're not subject to tax so long as my airline flying to your country doesn't suffer tax, and there is actually such an airline doing the route. But so you could have the crazy position that one day you're protected from tax because there is a competitor from your destination country, and the next day they close down the route, and suddenly you're becoming taxable because they're not enjoying a benefit. Or if you're looking at the Middle Eastern countries where they compete with each other for transit traffic, you may suddenly find that the UAE, which has been very aggressive at signing up treaties across Africa, their airline doesn't suffer withholding tax, and there's reciprocity, but you're flying for another country, you haven't got the same level of DTA protection, or you're not such an attractive market for the reciprocal use of reciprocal rights, and there's no airline flying to your country, then you may suddenly find you've got an unhelpful withholding tax that weakens your competitive position against the Emirates.
That sounds very complex then, to try and work out what the actual tax applying to your airline in country would be. And it sounds like it can change quite quickly depending on what happens to other airlines and other double taxation agreements.
Yeah, I think it can, and we've seen this. And I think there's still a bit of a emotional thing in the heads of tax inspectors from lots of countries and tax legislators who think that airlines and the people who travel on them are all rich, and therefore they're an appropriate target for taxes. And perhaps we see that in the UK as well. You go to the airport, here's a fiver to be allowed to park, or get out of your car, not before you've even parked, and so on. It just seems a magnet for taxes.
Yeah, I also see that globally, and there's this idea that, the word sin tax should also apply to airlines. And despite the actually much lower than one might think portion of greenhouse gas emissions caused by the airline industry, it seems that they're kind of tarred with the brush of being a bad polluter. And so there's a general consensus that we may as well tax airlines as much as we can.
Yep, that seems like it. And also, yeah, they think there's a market, you're going to get your share of it. That seems to be part of the market, the rationale as well.
And Russell, talk us through that. In general, how do we see that applying to the airline industry across Africa?
Yeah, the general thing is probably what it should be, that a domestic airline ticket will carry VAT at the standard rate. It's not always the case, but that's generally it. And cross-border international transport should not. Now, we have seen some differences on that. We've seen people trying to charge VAT on international travel. And then the next thing is, well, that's all right on the output side. What about the input? Um, can I will I suffer VAT when paying my local suppliers? So I pay the company that brings the truck that pumps the fuel into the wing. I pay the catering company. I pay the people who clean the blankets and the tablecloths. Are all those things going to be subject to VAT or not? And the answer is depends. Which is not a great answer, but it depends on the local law and the interpretation of it, and how much you can demonstrate the facts and how they fit in the law. I think it's not one of those things that perhaps getting looked at increasingly skeptically by government tax authorities.
And Russell, what about customs? Do airlines across Africa have to worry about customs and excise duties?
I'm sure they should, and I think probably not when you import the airplane unless you're going to
Hmm.
register it in that country and use it there, in which case there's a big bill coming. But if you're flying in and out, not really importing it, it's not getting clear for home consumption. But a more interesting problem may come: your plane breaks down in some place down the line in your network, and you need to get a spare part into the country, which could be a big expensive thing. Now, funny enough, many years ago, when I was thinking about leaving the UK tax authority, and I was working at the time, I looked at a job at an airline. As I recall the numbers, their tax department was about a dozen at the time. Broadly, it was 4 income tax and 8 customs. So
Wow.
if my memory is right, it's probably around those numbers. So it can be a big issue, partly because the numbers are so big. The big duty rate on a very expensive piece of kit. You might think it's only coming in temporarily, but then you do get into a debate on how that is, but that's the case. And it may be, well, your plane's stuck here. How badly do you want it in?
Yeah, makes sense. And as you say, big capital items. So, that's when customs can also become big costs.
Yes.
And Russell, are there any special tax regimes that impact the airline industry across Africa?
I think, yeah, we've talked earlier about the special taxes on liftings, the revenue you make from carrying passengers or cargo out of a country, and that's probably the main one, or various funnies about working out what your profit margin is, those things. I think there's all sorts of other things that they come along with saying, well, now we want to tax on the passengers you're getting on your plane. And it may not be called a tax, it may be a airport user fee charged on the airline, or a security tax charged on the airline, and so on, and many of them. And if you look at, Nigeria is a great point, if you look at the breakdown of taxes you're paying on your ticket pricing, it gets a long list. All those things may be paid by the passenger, but the person who's got to write the check to the agencies is the airline.
Mm, yeah,
He's
of
he's got
course.
to probably, otherwise he's on the hook, generally speaking. So I think those are some of them, and it may be. Just trying to think of other things. There's all sorts of things they find to levy taxes on. One thing to watch out for, perhaps, is repatriation. So you take a passenger to a country, and this is not just an African thing. You take a passenger to the country, he gets denied entry because he hasn't got the right paperwork. He gets back on your plane at your cost to be taken back to where he's come from, generally speaking.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and that can be a significant cost. And what about currencies? So we know there's very many currencies across Africa, and many of them are fairly volatile. So does this cause an issue for the taxation of airlines?
I'm not so sure about taxation, but there probably is a taxation problem in it somewhere. And how do you get recognition for your exchange losses? But it's more a problem commercially. Now, I've sold my tickets in currency X, not in dollars. My costs are all in dollars. By the time I get the money out of the country, it's worth half of what it was when I was paid by the passenger. That's not very nice for my bottom line. And you think that doesn't happen? It happens a lot. There's an awful lot of countries across Africa and other parts of the world who are short of foreign exchange at the moment and are delaying airlines' right to repatriate their ticket sales. It has been a big problem. I think Ethiopia and Nigeria were particularly bad culprits at one stage, so they both have done work on reducing it. Malawi is a current bad culprit, and that's something to watch out for. One device then is, can you sell tickets in a foreign currency in that country? And that may be an answer. Some countries don't allow it. They say you must sell in our local currency, which is friendly. And the final one is, people have taken extreme measures. Some airlines have. If you don't give us our money, we'll stop flying. The other one you might think is, how can I shift the balance of sales to another country rather than the destination country? So is there more people trying to fly in there than fly out? If so, I may be able to reduce my exposure to the local currency that way through commercial means.
Wow. So overall, what I'm taking away is that if you're an airline operating across Africa, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of risks that can impact your fiscal situation.
I'm afraid there is, yeah. And it doesn't end with tax. You look at your fuel. Can you buy it? Is it a sensible price? Do I need to tanker it in from overseas, if that's always allowed? Where I get my plane maintained? I've had problems with slots, and that's not just in the destination country, but they may be complaining their airline can't get slots in your home country, and it's your fault. It may not be, but that's what they may see in that sort of spat between Nigeria and the UK fairly recently, for example. I think between Nigeria and the Emirates, a bit more recent, a bit more further back in time. And there's all sorts of other funny requests we've seen over the years. Oh, your plane's not big, not good enough. We don't want to fly in that thing. You go to the wrong airport. You should fly to Heathrow, not Gatwick. Something out of Ghana. Where's the business class on the plane you're using to serve us? We insist there should be one, and so on. Oh, and visa problems. Why don't you let our people in? If you don't let our people in, we won't let your airline in. Again, look at the spat between Nigeria and the Emirates. That's been going on.
So lots of challenges for airlines operating across Africa.
I'm afraid so. Yes, I'm afraid so.